Hello, my name's Matthew Harrison. I'm a farming systems scientist at the University of Tasmania in Australia. In this webinar we'll be looking at DSAT, the Decision Support System for Agro-Technology Transfer, I believe the acronym is. I'm looking at DSAT version 4.7.0.0, so note that if you look at this webinar sometime after the webinar was created, there's most likely to be subsequent versions, so there could be subtle changes in the layout, subtle or radical depending on the time you look at this webinar relative to the time it was created, I guess. So we've got a number of different menus in DSAT. I'm not going to talk about all of these today. I'm going to talk about probably the most familiar or the most I guess versatile or most needed option of DSAT, most needed in my opinion anyway, and this is the seasonal analysis, so that allows genotype by environment by management simulations, so it looks at a daily time step, so it allows you effectively to look at a range of different genotypes or management options, for example irrigation or fertilizer, in a single simulation. It's quite an effective and efficient way of doing it. You can also look at rotational analysis, and again that's a long-term thing. So if you had crop rotation, for example, maize after soybeans, then maize, then fallow, then wheat, you could simulate that rotation, that 5-year rotation over 30 years, for example, in this simulation framework. You can also look at the effect of different genetics, so different genotypes. You can also look at ecotypes, which are groups of different genotypes. There's a number of different accessories in DSAT. Part of that is a sensitivity analysis, graphing calculators, as well as statistical coefficient estimators. There are a number of different explorers as well as utilities in there, references and shortcuts. I'm not going to go into the details. We'll save those for subsequent webinars. So to create a seasonal analysis, you can start from an example, but probably always best to create your own. So to do that, you hit this crop management button up in the top. That will lead into what's called the XBuild simulation framework. Go to File, go to New. It'll come up with this little error. Read that. Just make sure that you're okay with the terms. Click Close. It will come up with this simulation builder, which is what I call it. I'm not sure if that's the appropriate name or not. You've got these different file types. This is very important, okay? So you've got experimental, sequential, seasonal, and spatial. Spatial's actually quite a useful thing, but we'll talk about that in a separate webinar. Seasonal, once you hit that, and once you've gone through these next buttons in the lower right-hand corner, once you've done that, you can't change it. It's grayed out, so your actual simulation is built. So make sure you set that one. That's very important. Now, these ones here with a little red star mean that they're mandatory, so you can't essentially progress without filling them in. The ones without a red star associated with a name are not mandatory, and if you skip them, that's fine. It will put a -99 in there, which tends to mean they're defaulted out. That's fine. You can come back and change them later on. If you're in a hurry, like I am in this webinar, you can leave them blank. So I'm not going to go into all of the details in this one. Instead, I'm going to open up an existing one that I know works. So I'm just going to cross this one off. I'm going to go back to DSAT. Here is my existing simulations here, and here's the treatment details. So this one here is one that looks like it's from from Pakistan. You can change these windows here, hopefully. By doing that, by clicking there, you can actually see the individual treatments. So there's a 0 kilograms of nitrogen, kilograms of seed per hectare, 25 and so on. Now, this is the one that I've created earlier. Sounds like a cooking show. If you click on your one, you should be able to see your treatments appear. All I've done is a simple one. I've just done 3 different seeding rates, just by way of example. So I've done 60, 80 and 160 kilograms of seed per hectare, and these will be all simulated using the same weather in the same simulation framework. Okay. The other thing I would mention while we're here is this refresh button. It's often that you'll go backwards and forwards between your simulation builder and the crop model engine, which is essentially what we're in now. Make sure you hit refresh. make sure you look at the modified date. Okay, so today is September 14. So just make sure that you've got the most recent one, because they can change if you're editing them all the time like I am. So right click, go edit. And now this is the XBuild framework that I mentioned before, which is what you will have. Notice that seasonal is now grayed out. That's because I've already saved it, and I've saved it and closed it. Okay, but I'm going to go through each of these. So it's very important that you do the same when you're creating this XBuild in your first case. Okay, experiment name. So I've said Matthew Harrison, MH. FL is for Florida, which is this site code here. 58 is the year of the first simulation, and 4 means the number of treatments that you wish to conduct. So I've actually only got 3 in this case, but I've said 4 here. So you can set it to something else, but I find it useful if it's intuitive, and then you can actually relate each of these names to each of these items in the experiment name to some of the experimental details here. Okay. So now we work through each of those steps. You'll notice that these are -99. That's because I've skipped them. Skip all this information. Make sure the crop is selected as you want it. In this simulation, I'm selecting wheat. So you go down to the bottom, hit wheat. Then you go to environment, go to fields. And now you've got the levels up the top here. You can add levels, and you'll see an additional level come up there. You can delete levels. It asks you if you want to delete. Yes, we hit yes. So this is not where you actually, if you want to do multiple fields, you can do that. Just bear in mind that the number of levels or factors that you include will increase the simulation duration every time you increase a factor. So we've put the field ID in here again. So this is, I've put the same as the experiment name, MHFL F804. You select your soil type, so it's got a number of predefined soil types. I've just selected a deep sandy loam in this case. This code here is automatically selected as soon as you select that one. So we go back, see how it's changed it there, hit this one back here. I generally select the same surface texture as what you selected for the soil type. So in this case we hit sandy loam. Depth of the soil, in this case, it's, well, we're at a site where it's very deep, so it's 2 meters deep. There's no surface stones, so we've hit 0 there. I've left these blank. I've also left the drainage type blank. The name, I've selected a Florida site, and if you select the wrong site, it will generally give you an error or a site that hasn't got it. So I've selected a site in Florida, in the US in this case. And this also is automatically populated, this site code here. Then hit OK. So I'm going to hit cancel in case I accidentally changed something there. Go back to fields. So we just went to fields. Now we go to initial conditions. Now, so you just bear in mind that you've got the residues, then you've got the profile. So initial conditions means the static conditions or the biophysical conditions at the start of your simulation. So here, these weather dates are associated with the site that I chose, so the Florida site. So we've essentially got from 1958 down to 2007. Select your previous crop. In this case, I'm going to say it was a fallow, which means there was no crop there, which means I'm hoping a better simulation because the soil water from the existing year hasn't been used, and there's also no surface organic matter. We select the root weight. There could be some dead organic matter there. We'll say 1,000 kilograms per hectare. Nodule weight, generally that's associated with legumes. Let's say 0. Rhizobia, I didn't touch that. So rhizobia, again, associated with legumes, doesn't really matter. So let's just say leave those as default. 1. Water table depth, don't care, leave that as 0. Crop residue, that's the remaining crop from the previous year. 1,000 kilos per hectare is 1 tonne per hectare, which is not that much. So you'd expect a little bit of surface coverage there, but not enough to sufficiently block emergence coming up the following year. So I think that's okay. Nitrogen residue of 2%, reasonable. Phosphorus residue of 1%. Incorporation, everything, so 100%, and the incorporation depth of 5 centimetres, so that's okay. The other thing, you've got profile, so I nearly hit OK then. Don't forget the surface profile. Right, so this is quite important. Always set your measurement date. Note that earlier versions of DSAT actually had these the other way around, so it had month and day. So we've got day, month, 2 letters for month, and then 3 letters for year. So I'm going to sow, we're in the northern hemisphere here, we're talking about wheat, so I'm going to sow at the start of, so in Australia, the 1st of the 10th would be in spring, so that would be autumn. So the 1st of the 10th, 1958. We've got our soil type populated from before, that's fine. Now we've got our soil details, these are particularly important. So these are the layers, you can click in here and change these, or you can let it default out to what it was before. So you have nitrogen as ammonium or nitrogen as nitrate, and you have the concentration in the soil, so milligrams per unit gram of soil. Now, we want to make the initial soil water 100%, and we want to make, well, let's just say, we don't want to make this nitrogen limiting, so let's say this is 200 kilograms of nitrogen at the start of the soil. To get it to redistribute through the profile, hit this recalculate button, and you can see it's recalculated there. You can also add additional layers or delete layers if you like, so that's okay. Make sure you hit OK, not cancel. I'm hitting cancel so I don't stuff up something in the case of this webinar. Now we go back to now environmental modifications you don't have to worry about, but I'll just go into that to show you what it is. That is essentially climatic modification, so you can modify day length, solar radiation, maximum minimum daily temperature, CO2, which is useful for climate change simulations, wind speed. I'm not going to do anything in this simulation. Management's important. You have to work through each of these details individually. Hit cultivars. So what I've done is I've selected only one cultivar. So I've selected wheat down the bottom. I've selected the cultivar Maxima. You can add cultivars if you like by hitting add. You might want to also simulate peanuts, and then you select your associated cultivar. So for example, a Chinese peanut. I'm not going to simulate it in this context, so we just remove that one, and it's giving me a big warning. So I may well have, I just hit cancel there. So I'll just go back to cultivars to make sure that that's okay. Yep, that's fine. Hit cancel. The cancel button is a useful thing for when you make a mistake, particularly in the context of a webinar. Go to planting. This is where I've entered the 3 treatments. Now this is can be quite touchy if you get it wrong, difficult to modify, so try to make sure you get it right in the first case. This arrow indicates, this little arrow here indicates where, what level you're on, and these details here are associated with this level. So if I click down here, you'll notice that these change, and I click for the 3rd one, and you'll see that they're 160. So essentially, I've done 3 different treatments, 60, 80, 160 plants per square metre. I'm doing a planting date in all cases, make sure they're the same, of the 1st of October 1958. Notice I've left emergent date blank, that's because it's not essential. I'm doing a planting method of dry seed, you could do anything else. I'm doing a planting distribution of rows, a row spacing of 20 centimetres, which is not that much. You might choose to go wider than that or even less. Row direction, if it's 0 degrees, that means you're going north. That's okay for here. And a planting depth of 5 centimetres, which is reasonable. Transplant, I haven't touched any of the details in there. You should hit OK, not cancel. Then go to irrigation. What I'm doing here is you select your year, so that's the start year. Efficiency fraction is the efficiency with which irrigation is absorbed, so it's saying 75% of the absorbed water, of the applied water is absorbed. Your date, so 1st of the 10th 1958, I'm applying 30 millimetres on sowing. You can add additional irrigations if you like, but that's really not important when you see what I'm about to do shortly, because I'm going to modify that in the treatments. Then we go to Fertilizer. What I've done here is because you're looking at multiple years, you can go on reported dates and then it will bring up the years there, and that's the default. What I've done is days after planting, and in that way you can essentially simulate multiple different years because you're doing it relative to sowing rather than relative to a year. So I'm applying essentially urea. You can click this drop down menu and pick different types of urea, for example ammonium nitrate, rock phosphate, calcium, ammonium sulfate, and so on and so forth. You can choose to put it on the surface, beneath the surface. You can put it as part of irrigation water. You can do all sorts of things there. I'm just putting it on the surface. You can put it on the surface or below. I'm putting in all 1 centimeters. I'm putting on quite a lot of nitrogen, 150 kilos per hectare, and that's because I don't want the crop to be nitrogen stressed. Okay, you can add more. You can add as many as you like by hitting add application. So I'm just going to hit cancel there. Now, organic amendments are as if you're spreading on organic manure, for example, or biochar or stuff like that. So we're not going to do that in this simulation. You can tillage or cultivate. You can look at harvest things, and you can look at chemical applications. I'm not talking about them here. We then go to treatments. Now this is important as well. So this is what the simulation chooses to run based on what you put in. So we've got 3 levels. That's fine. These won't be called 60, 80, 160, they'll be called sim something. So you have to rename them, but the main thing is to make sure that you select them. So I've selected Maxima here. If you did, for example, 3 different cultivars, it would come up with 3 different options in there. Make sure you've selected 111 in there if you're not doing a treatment in there. Notice soil analysis is blank. That's because I'm not using the soil analysis details. Initial conditions, yes, I'm using those initial conditions that I put in. Planting. Okay, so see how it's got the 60, 80, 160 there. Yes, we do want to do that. 80, whoops, 80, 160. Fertilizer. See how it's days after planting, so I've specified that. So select all those. All of these are blank because I haven't chose to modify them, and these are defaults as well. So make sure you get these details right, otherwise your simulation outputs might look strange. Remember to hit OK in each case. I'm hitting cancel because I don't want to muck things up in the context of this simulation. Now we go to simulation options, and so we're into the final menu now. You can see our years there. We're starting our simulation on the day of sowing, 1st to the 10th, 1958. Now we've got more than 30 years here, but I'm only doing 30. So essentially we're using years as the replication. You could do 2 and then it would do 60 years. You've got a random seed number. You have a crop module. So if it was wheat, you pick CropSim CRES. You start on a specified date, so that's set, so that's okay. Notice how it's only got 1 level here. You can add in different levels. Hit options. Right, so we're using the water balance module. We're using nitrogen. We're not using anything else, except for, well, we are using tillage and we're using default CO2, but just leave all those as defaults. Methods, we're using this simulated weather, so that's fine. Initial soil conditions, that's fine. So basically all of these, you could have a look at them, but I leave them as default. Management's particularly important, so planting on their reported date, that's fine, leave that as is. Irrigation and water, I've changed this to automatic to ensure that it actually gets watered. So management depth, I've said 100. Technically that could be 200. Threshold of maximum 50%, so it will start watering when water gets below 50%. It will stop when it hits 100. The end of application according to growth stage, and the efficiency fraction. Fertilizer, I've also specified as days after planting. So the default will be on reported dates. I've got days after planting, so it's matched with you'll remember that I had it in the treatments before. So it's important to specify that as days after planting so it replicates for the year. Organic amendments, I've left that as default. That's just how it was. Harvest, I've left that as default. Okay, hit cancel. Hit OK rather, so I've hit cancel. Now we just go, when you've done, you just hit save. Okay, you save your simulation, and then when you've saved it, you go to File, Exit. Do you want to save the simulation before closing? You should say yes. I'm going to say no. Then you'll come back to your original DSAT pane, which is here. Then you find your simulation, make sure you hit refresh, and then you say, okay, this is the most recent one. There's my MHFL 5804. I select it. You'll see the treatments pop up there, so that's good. Then you hit run. Then it'll bring up this dialog box, and you'll say, do I want to run all treatments? Yes. Hit run. Wait for a minute. The bigger the simulation size, or the more levels and treatments that you include, the longer it will take to run the simulation. So it's just pausing for a second. My computer is straining because I've got multiple applications open, which is well organised for a webinar when you're waiting on demand with people watching. But hopefully that finishes soon. If that doesn't finish soon, I can cancel it. It comes up with that simulations are completed. So we just hit that's OK, hit OK. So normally you get this dialog wait time down the bottom, which I don't think it come up because my computer is struggling a bit. So you hit OK. Then you go to analysis. And again, you just wait for a second because of the size of the simulation. It takes a little while to pop up. And depending on the day, the weather, how you hold your tongue, it depends on how long the actual simulation comes up. Now this is not an overly big simulation, so it shouldn't take too long. It'll come up with that summary there, which is very useful. So it's got the experiment title, the experiment code, the number of runs, the file creation date, as well as the replication. So you just hit OK. That's just a summary. Now we just wait for a second. Now it's saying what do you want to save your report as, and it's following the nomenclature that you used before. It's got this OSR because it's a report file, so that's fine. You hit OK, so that's overwritten my existing report. Now this is very, very useful. This is one of the most useful parts I find for interrogating model outputs. Okay, so we've got biophysical, we've got economic, and we've got home, right? Now we're on the biophysical pane here with these variables. What do we want to see? We want to see anthesis date. What else do we have? Drainage, emergence date could be useful. No, we don't want to probably look at emergence date. Maybe we want to look at harvested yield, maybe mature yield, irrigation applications number, irrigation in millimetres. What else can we look at? Notice how these ones here are greyed out. That means because we didn't select them in the simulation. If I had have selected K, as in potassium, within the simulation, these would be basically simulated and they would be outputs. So then we have nitrogen applications. I'll take that, thank you. I'll also have, I think that might do me. Average solar radiation, precipitation. Precipitation might be useful. And then once you're happy with the outputs to be plotted, you can have box plot, cumulative frequency plot, or mean variance plot. Hit OK, plot. Now, the anthesis dates around about day 248. So that's how good are your calculations? So that's about 7 or 8 months into the year. So that's the median date. Notice we've got the green box means the 0 to 25th percentile. The yellow area means the interquartile zone, so between the 25th and the 75th percentile, and the 75th to the 100th is shown by the blue zone. They're all the same in this case. Not very interesting, but useful to know nonetheless. Then you might think, well, where are my other outputs? All you do is you just hit cross, and up they come. So now it's showing my harvested yield, and in this case, we basically haven't got a lot of variation. So we're going from basically a median value in most cases of around about 3.5 tonne or 3,500 kilograms per hectare. That's fine, with a range of about 1,900 to about 4,700 for all of them. So you might want to go back and do different treatments, different nitrogen levels, different sowing times, different fertilizers, and you might want to do a factorial combination, but it'll take longer. I'll cross that one off. So what else did we have? We had yield at harvest, maturity, so they're much the same. So I don't really know the difference between harvested yield and harvest maturity. Then we have the number of irrigation applications. You can see there's quite a range. In some years there's only one, other years there's actually 12, with a median of about 3 applications per year. That's okay. That's good. That means the model's applying irrigation. What about the amount of irrigation applied in millimetres? Median of about 315 millimetres within a growing season. Well, that very much depends on your location in terms of the long-term rainfall. So it's applying it depending on your soil moisture conditions, if you remember the rule that we applied. Quite a lot of variation there, so you might want to go back and check your simulation conditions. Nitrogen applications, it's done 6, so that's good. It's applying nitrogen, that's a check, good. And that's it. So you can look at different sorts of regressions and all that sort of thing. But I'm not going to talk about anything else in the context of this webinar, but so I think we'll stop there. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next webinar.